Bobby Seale, co-founder of the Black Panther Party, was born on October 22nd, 1936 in Dallas, Texas. His early life and education played a significant role in shaping his later activism and leadership. Seale's upbringing, the environment in which he was raised, and his educational experiences uh, laid the foundation for his revolutionary ideas and the eventual creation of the Black Panther Party. So to truly understand Bobby Seale's early life, it is necessary to look at the socio-political landscape of the time, his family background, and his early educational experiences. Bobby Seale's parents were both from the South, and his mother a domestic worker, and his father a railroad worker. The Seale family lived in Dallas, but when Bobby was still a child, his family moved to North Oakland, California, during the early years of World War II. And at the time, the migration of African Americans from the rural South to urban areas in the North and West was a trend known as the Great Migration, which was driven by the search for better employment opportunities and the desire to escape the oppressive racial conditions of the South. Seale's family life was marked by both hardship and resilience. His father, in particular, faced many challenges, including struggles with maintaining steady work, which added to the financial instability of the household. And this instability, it was compounded by the pervasive racial discrimination and poverty faced by many black families during the era. As a result, Zero and his siblings, they were exposed early to the to the racial and economic disparities that would later fuel their revolutionary ideals. So the absence of a consistent father figure and the strained economic situation, it shaped his understanding of authority and systems of control. His mother, strong and resourceful, played a central role in raising him and instilling in him a sense of pride in his black heritage. Her influence, combined with Seale's early exposure to racial inequalities racial inequities, would later inspire his commitment to social justice and his dedication to challenging oppressive systems. So, growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, he was exposed to the harsh realities of racial segregation, discrimination, and violence. So these formative experiences, they would have a profound impact on his perspective and sense of self-worth. The social and political climate of the time was dominated by the remnants of Jim Crow laws in the South and widespread institutional racism throughout the United States. Seal, as a young black boy, was forced to navigate these hostile environments, both in public spaces and within the educational systems that were often segregated and hostile to black students. His awareness of racial injustices was sharpened by the national and international movements for civil rights that were beginning to gain traction. While still a child, he would have been exposed to the horrific events of racial violence, such as the 1955 murder of Emmett Till in Mississippi, which shocked the nation and galvanized the civil rights movement. And such events were imprinted on the minds of black youth like Seal, helping to crystallize their understanding of the deep seated racism that permeated every aspect of American life. Though Seal was still a young teenager, during the early days of the civil rights movement, the influence of figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and the broader movement for black liberation began to permeate his consciousness. While King advocated for nonviolent resistance, Malcolm X, whom Seal would admire, whom Seal would he would come to admire, promoted a more radical approach to black liberation, one that emphasized self-defense and an uncompromising stance against racial oppression. So this ideological diversity, it would later inform the development of Seale's political philosophy and approach to activism. So his formal education was inconsistent, largely because of the racial and the economic challenges that his family faced. He attended several schools throughout his early years, often encountering the racial prejudices that were common in the school systems of the time. So these experiences of racism, exclusion, and unequal treatment would have been pivotal in shaping his critical stance toward the American educational system, which he viewed as an extension of the larger oppressive structures in society. In his youth, he attended Merritt College in Oakland, California, a pivotal moment in his life because at Merritt College, he encountered the intellectual environment that would lay the groundwork for his racial transformation. And it was here that he became immersed in the ideas of revolutionary thinkers and began to question the prevailing social and political order. His education at Merritt College was integral, not just in terms of academic learning, but in introducing him to radical political theory and the concept of direct action. While attending Merritt, Seale met Huey Newton, who would become his partner in founding the Black Panther Party. So Newton and Seale, they both shared similar frustrations with the status quo, and they recognized the need for a radical militant response to the systemic violence and oppression that were faced by Black people. So this meeting, it marked the beginning of friendship that would change the course of their lives and the trajectory of Black liberation movements in the United States. So his time at Merritt College, uh, though brief, it was instrumental in helping him forge a path toward revolutionary politics. And it was here that he first became exposed to the works of Marxists and Pan African thinkers, as well as the teachings of Malcolm X. So these influences helped shape his understanding of imperialism, capitalism, and colonialism, ideologies that he would later reject in favor of revolutionary socialism and black nationalism. It was also at Merritt that he began to develop the skills of organizing and leadership that would define his career as a political activist. So after his time at Merritt College, his life took another significant turn. So in 1955, he enlisted in the United States Air Force, seeking an escape from the uncertain economic prospects he faced in Oakland. While in the military, he served as a dishwasher and a cook, but the Air Force experience also had a lasting impact on him. The military exposed him to a more structured environment and heightened his awareness of, of racial issues. So his service was marked by a sense of disillusionment with the institution, as he witnessed firsthand the ways in which race and power intersected within American institutions. And the experience of serving in a segregated military, combined with the lessons of the civil rights movement and the international struggles for liberation, it further crystallized his understanding of the systemic forces that perpetuated inequality and oppression. He came to see the military as another arm of the capitalist and imperialist forces that were responsible for the subjugation of black people. And this realization, it would guide his thinking as he returned to Oakland, ready to take on the challenge of leading a revolutionary movement for black freedom. So Seale, now just like with Huey P. Newton, he was also instrumental in the creation of the party. Now, the thing is that while he took the lead in the party's intellectual and political direction, Seale was the one that focused on organizing and the practical aspects of running the Black Panther Party, including its community programs, its military style structure, and the message as well too. So in addition to finding the party, he was also the chairman and also one of its most vocal advocates. And he also helped organize some of the party's most notable initiatives, including the free breakfast for children program, health clinics, and educational outreach efforts in Oakland and beyond. And also, one of the most noticeable events that took place around in this time period overall is known as the Chicago 8 trial. Originally, it was known as the Chicago 7 trial before Bobby Seale's severance from the case. Now, this remains one of the most significant legal and political events in American history, particularly in relation to the Black Panther Party, civil rights, and the tensions surrounding the Vietnam War. because Bobby Seale, the co-founder, he was one of the central figures whose trial and the events leading up to it helped to, really it helped to illuminate the deep divides in American society during the late 1960s and the early 1970s. So, to fully understand the Chicago 8 trial and Bobby Seale's role in it, it is important that we need to consider the broader historical context, because pretty much how it went was this. So, in the mid 1960s, the United States was embroiled in the Vietnam War, a conflict that generated widespread protests, especially among young people and marginalized communities. And the civil rights movement, they had already shaken the foundations of racial segregation in the South, but tension remained high, particularly in urban areas, well, urban centers in the North. So the Chicago 8 trial, it stemmed from protests that erupted in 1968 during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The Chicago protests were a flashpoint in the growing cultural and political polarization of the time. Thousands of demonstrators, comprising anti Vietnam War activists, civil rights advocates, and other left wing groups, they descended on the city to protest the nomination of Hubert Humphrey as the Democratic candidate for president. And the convention became a chaotic scene of violent clashes between protesters and the police, who were heavily militarized and responded with force. And in the wake of the violence, 8 prominent figures were all charged with conspiring to incite a riot and other charges related to the disruption of the convention. Initially known as the Chicago Seven, the group included some of the most outspoken activists of the time, including Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin of the Youth International Party, also known as the Yippies, Tom Hayden and Rennie Davis of the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, David Dellinger of the National Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, and the Black Panther Party's Bobby Seale. So, Seale's involvement in the Chicago 8 trial was marked by immediate controversy. He was in Chicago during the protest, but not as a major organizer. So his presence at the trial, it was due to his outspoken activism and his prominent role as a Black Panther leader, which made him a target for law enforcement. And his charges were based on speeches and statements he made in the months leading up to the convention, where he was accused of urging people to resist police authority and promote violence. So his trial was overshadowed by a number of shocking and aggressive tactics employed by the prosecution and the judge, known as Julius Hoffman. So Seale's behavior in the courtroom, however, it would lead to an even more intense national focus on his role in the trial. So Seale, who had no legal representation at the time, he repeatedly clashed with Judge Hoffman and the rest of the court. And when Seale attempted to represent himself, claiming that the trial was racially biased and not offering him a fair chance at a defense, the judge responded by using the full power of the court to control him. So his treatment in the courtroom, it was brutal, and it led to several iconic moments in the trial's history. At one point, when Seale attempted to speak, he was bound and gagged in the courtroom after a heated exchange with Judge Hoffman. And this moment became a symbol of the systemic oppression faced by Black activists in the United States. Because it wasn't just a moment of personal humiliation for Seale, but really it was a public representation of the greater forces working to silence Black voices and movements that challenge the status quo. So, despite the extreme nature of his treatment, his defiance only made his case more visible, because his refusal to be cowed into submission, even when shackled and gagged, was in many ways emblematic of the Black Power movement that the Black Panther Party represented. And it also highlighted the racial and political divisions that had come to a head in America during the late 1960s. So, after weeks of chaos in the courtroom, including several incidents in which Seale was physically restrained. The judge ruled to sever Seale's case from the others, so thereby creating the Chicago 8 from the original Chicago 7. So Seale's case was moved to another trial, but the damage had already been done. Seale had become a symbol of the way that the US government was willing to go to extraordinary lengths to suppress black radical movements. So, when it comes to the political and the cultural impact of this event, is that his participation in the trial and the way he was treated, it had a significant impact on both the public perception of the Black Panther Party and on Bobby Seale's own political career. Because the trial, viewed by many as a politically motivated attempt to silence dissent, the extreme measures that were taken to ensure that Seale was removed from the trial, his gagging and restraining, and his eventual sentencing to prison, they all contributed to the growing disillusionment among Black Americans with the judicial system. For Black activists, Bobby Seale became a martyr in the fight against a corrupt and racist system. His story was taken up by revolutionary Black intellectuals, artists, and activists who saw him as a symbol of resistance. And his treatment at the Chicago 8 trial made clear that the state was not only trying to suppress Black radicalism, but they were also attempting to delegitimize the larger civil rights struggle. So Seale's involvement in the trial also brought the Black Panther Party into sharp focus. Because while the party had already garnered attention for its confrontational tactics and its rhetoric advocating for Black power and self determination, the trial spotlighted their ideological conflict with mainstream America. In the eyes of many, the violence used by the police to subdue Seale in the court was just an extension of the larger campaign to undermine and discredit the Black Panther Party and the larger civil rights movement. And despite being removed from the trial and facing separate charges, Seale's political visibility continued to rise. So he went on to run for mayor of Oakland in 1973, demonstrating that his ideas and approach to activism had widespread appeal. And his political philosophy and that of the Black Panther Party more broadly as well too influenced generations of radical activists who saw in the Panthers a model for resistance and change. So the Chicago 8 trial, it still remains a watershed moment in the history of political dissent in the US. It was a trial that was just not about the individuals that were involved, but about the broader issues of racial inequality, civil rights, freedom of speech, and the power of the state to control and suppress dissent. For Bobby Seale, the trial was a moment of personal and political transformation. So, though he was removed from the trial, his treatment solidified his status as a major figure in the Black Power movement. The enduring images of his gagging and restraint in the courtroom, the boldness of his actions, and the unyielding nature of his activism cemented his place in history as both a leader of the Black Panther Party and a symbol of the struggle for racial justice in America. In the years following the trial, Seale would continue to be an outspoken advocate for racial justice. Though his views evolved over time, ultimately the Chicago 8 trial, it wasn't about the suppression of one man or one organization, but about the systemic forces of racism and repression that sought to stifle movements for social change. Now, for historians, the trial stands as a testament to the lengths that the American government would go to in order to suppress dissent. And it was also clear it was also a clear reflection of the tensions and divisions in American society during a time of social upheaval. Because today, the legacy of the Chicago 8 trial, it remains relevant as the fight for racial equality and justice continues in various forms across the country. So, Seale's role in the Chicago 8 trial it marks a significant moment in the history of the American civil rights and the Black Panther Party and the broader struggle for justice. His defiance in the face of systemic oppression and his eventual removal from the trial remain one of the most poignant and powerful moments in the history of American legal and political struggles. However, the Black Panther Party's rapid rise, it also set the stage for its eventual decline, because throughout the late 1960s, the party faced increasing FBI surveillance, COINTELPRO operations, and violent clashes with law enforcement. And Seale and Newton, they were not only political targets, but their growing leadership within the party, it also began to generate internal tensions, because the stress of being both a leader and a target of state repression, it began to take its toll on the party's unity and coherence. And in the early 1970s, Seale's role within the Black Panther Party, it began to shift. So he was arrested in 1968 for his involvement in the infamous Oakland 7 trial, which further exasperated tensions within the party. So, and once again, the trial, which was part of a broader effort by the government to dismantle radical black groups, it saw Seale charged with conspiracy to incite a riot at 1968 Democratic National Convention. And despite the legal battles, his energy remained largely focused on continuing to organize against systemic oppression. But the internal divisions within the party, they were mounting, because by the early 1970s, the party had begun to fracture under the weight of ideological differences, leadership struggles, and the increasing militarization of law enforcement. And Newton's personal troubles, including his drug abuse and later his conviction for the murder of a police officer, it further destabilized the organization. And as one of the Black Panther Party's most prominent figures, Seale found himself not only fighting the state, but also defending his position within the increasingly divided leadership of the party. In 1971, Seale made a difficult decision to break with the Black Panther Party, so he officially distanced himself from the group, frustrated by the lack of direction and the growing authoritarianism within the organization, which he had felt had veered away from its original revolutionary goals. So his departure from the party, it marked the final blow for their national structure. And then by the 1970s, the party was largely dismantled. And the FBI's concerted campaign against black liberation movements, combined with the internal strife and external repression, had ultimately led to the disintegration of one of the most significant movements of the 1960s and the 1970s. So after the dissolution of the Black Panther Party, Bobby Seale faced the challenge of rebuilding his life and finding a new purpose, because the loss of the party's political relevance and his own disenchantment with the movement, it left him in a so like really it left him in a difficult position. Much of the idealism that had defined his early years was replaced by a sense of personal and collective loss. Yet he refused to fade into obscurity. In the years following the Black Panther Party's decline, he continued to be politically active, although not with the same intensity that had defined his earlier years, but he turned his focus to more mainstream politics and activism. And he ran for public office in Oakland, seeking to serve as the city's first black mayor in 1973. And while he did not win the election, his campaign was emblematic of his evolving political philosophy, one that emphasized the need to work within the system in order to achieve lasting change. So Seale's pivot toward more conventional political avenues was a sharp contrast to his previous militancy and ideological stance. He also became a vocal critic of the government's treatment of black people and other marginalized groups, especially in the context of the war on drugs and the rise of mass incarceration. Despite these setbacks that he had faced, after the party's collapse, he still remained committed to advocating for justice and equality. He became a prominent speaker, author, and commentator on the issues of race, politics, and black empowerment. And Seale's memoir, Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton, published in 1970, it offered a reflection on his experiences and the internal struggles within the party. And this work provided valuable insights into the man behind the militant image, offering a window into Seale's political evolution and his understanding of the limits of revolutionary struggle. In later years, he also turned to activism on a more personal level because he worked with various organizations, particularly those focused on prison reform and the rights of black and working class communities. His involvement in community based initiatives signaled a shift from, so really it signaled a shift away from the armed struggle and toward a more pragmatic form of activism aimed at tangible improvements in the lives of black people. Though his influence was no longer as dominant as it had been in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, his later life, so really his later life served as a reminder of the personal cost of revolutionary leadership. He had experienced the deaths of state repression, losing friends, comrades, and years of his life to the struggles of the Black liberation movement. Yet, despite the many challenges that he faced, he maintained a belief in the potential for social transformation, even if the radical optimism of his youth had dimmed. In his final years, Bobby Seale continued to be a significant figure in the history of Black radical thought and activism. While he had moved away from the militant stance of the Black Panther Party, he never abandoned his commitment to social justice. So his post Black Panther Party activism reflected his recognition of the need for a broader, more inclusive approach to fighting systemic oppression. One that took one that took into account the need for both community building and political reform. So Seale's later years were marked by a return to family and a focus on the long-term struggles of marginalized communities. So Seale's story, therefore, is one of transformation, of a man that of a man shaped by the turbulent and often painful history of black activism in the 1960s and 1970s, yet never fully consumed by it. His later years were a testament to resilience and the enduring power of those who, despite facing immense personal and political challenges, continue to fight for the rights and the dignity of the oppressed. So Seale's contribution to the Black Panther Party and to the fight for racial equality is monumental, and he remains to this day an iconic figure in the history of black radicalism and continues to speak on issues of social justice. So what are the contributions of the Black Panther Party? What is it overall that they have all accomplished? So on one hand, they accomplished a lot when it came to armed self-defense, community programs, and also had political influence. So one of the most notable contributions of Newton and Bobby Seale was the emphasis on self-defense against police brutality, because the party's open carry of firearms and its monitoring of police activity in black neighborhoods, it brought attention to the police violence. And the Black Panther Party also initiated several community programs that were focused on meeting the basic needs of black Americans. And the programs, once again, they included the free breakfast for children program, health clinics, clothing drives, and education programs. And the party's efforts to provide for the community in the face of systemic neglect became a model for grassroots activism. And the party's actions and their ideology, it also influenced other revolutionary movements both in the U.S. and internationally. And of course, the Black Panther Party's 10-point program became a touchstone for Black liberation and revolutionary politics. So overall, there are like a lot of lessons and overall important questions overall that we must learn, we must ask ourselves about, a lot of what the Black Panther Party has all done. And as we do conclude this video here today, I want to go over ahead and go over quickly overall about the lessons and also, questions overall that, if you ever have the time to go on ahead, take a look at if you have the time to look at and to really see, what your view on it is, what your opinion on it is, you know. So like when it comes down to the lessons, so like when it comes down to the lessons, a lot of lessons that we've learned from this is like the impact of early life on activism and the role of revolutionary ideologies, the power of community organizing, the legacy of armed self-defense, um, the media representation and its consequences, and the internal and external struggles, and also the enduring influence of the Black Panther Party as well too. And also, here are the questions, and I will, leave them up here for a few seconds, of course. But these are all different types of questions that overall that we have to like, be able to ask ourselves, and really honestly to, like I said before, to give our own opinions, our own answers, our own perspectives on the different types of like say what it is like how the Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale's personal experiences with racism and discrimination, like how did that help, so really how did that overall shape their political beliefs, and also in what ways did the party's 10-point program reflect their vision for social change, and also like say in this case what role did the media, what portrayal did they play in the public's perception of the Black Panther Party, and how this affected their ability to achieve their goals. So yeah, so there are a lot of questions, and overall, like I said, once again, if you have time on your hands, if you ever have the time, of course, do take time to answer these. Once again, not a quiz, not a test, but you get my meaning. But overall, though, you know, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale's leadership of the Black Panther Party had a profound impact on the history of racial justice in the United States. Their advocacy for self defense, community empowerment, and the end of systemic oppression resonated with Black Americans and revolutionaries around the world. Now, though the Black Panther Party eventually they faded due to internal and external struggles and the challenges within, but the contributions of Newton and Seale continue to influence contemporary social justice movements, and their work remains a testament to the enduring struggle for racial equality, justice, and freedom. But that is all, folks. And of course, if you enjoy this video, always, and of course, if you enjoy more content on this channel, then as always, of course, subscribe, like, comment as well too down below to give your thoughts and your opinions and your views on this. But other than that, that does it here today. And all that's left to say is, ladies and gentlemen, is to always be smooth, to always be steady, and to always be aggressive. Peace.